A year ago today, I found out I had Mosaic Down Syndrome. A year ago. How has it already been a whole freaking year? I have learned so much in this past year about myself, about the condition I have, and so much more about Down syndrome in general. I have learned that there is not only 3 forms of Down syndrome, Mosaic Down syndrome, and the translocation form of Down syndrome, but there is also mosaic translocation of Down syndrome. I've also learned this past year that not all trisomy 21 is non-dysfunctional. I can't talk right. I know I'm probably saying that wrong, but it's true. Non-dysfunctional means that the trisomy 21 mutation is a random occurrence that happens through the process of meiosis and mitosis. But if something is inherited, it is not a random occurrence. Since learning I had Mosaic Down syndrome, I have then found out that my 2 kids who have Down syndrome are not non-dysfunctional. They inherited it from me since I have trisomy 21 in my reproductive cells. I have about a 50% chance of my kids inheriting Down syndrome. And this just sparks the question for me, is there any difference in people with Down syndrome who did inherit it, let's say from a parent who has Mosaic Down syndrome? Like, is there a difference between that and people who have it the non-dysfunctional way by random occurrence? I don't know, probably not, but it's just a really interesting concept to me to think about. I have also learned this past year that if you have an MTHFR gene mutation, your chances of having a child with Down syndrome are higher than the typical person. And I think the most interesting thing I decided to deep dive this year that I've learned about is the discovery of Down syndrome and why it's called Down syndrome. A lot of people are aware of the fact that Down syndrome is named after John Langdon Down. This is because people think he discovered Down syndrome. But did he? John Langdon Down was a British physician that advocated for people with mental disabilities. And in 1858, he took the position as a medical superintendent at a mental asylum. When he arrived, all of the patients there were severely neglected and had super poor hygiene. So he ended up getting all new staff and he prioritized their health and hygiene. While he was there, he was doing research on race classification. When doing this race classification, he noticed that he labeled many people as the Mongolian race, more than he expected to have in the asylum. And this was because he listed that they all had very similar mental disabilities and very similar facial features. He described these features as having a very flat and round face, having a large tongue, having oblique eyes, almond-shaped eyes, wrinkly foreheads, and a small nose. While looking into this, he discovered that Mongols are very humorous, very full of life, are great at imitating others, mimicking, and have great chances of improving their skills with certain techniques, such as speech. He decided to name this disability that he discovered Mongolism because he thought this only affected Mongolian people. But here's the thing, and I don't know if I'm saying this guy's name right. I hope I am. If not, correct me. In 1958, Jerome Lejeune is the one who actually discovered that Mongolism was actually caused by an extra 21st chromosome. This French physician is the one who brought to the attention of others that having an extra chromosome is a trisomy, and being that the extra chromosome is the 21st one, he declared this to be trisomy 21. Jerome Lejeune is the one who stated that an extra chromosome is likely to cause cells to have some overexpressive genes. He was the first researcher to discover that a chromosome abnormality can cause mental disabilities. And it wasn't until 1961 that people abandoned the term Mongolism, like for good, in the science community. But then they went on to call it Down's syndrome. Now, in the US, we dropped the possessive. We don't call it Down's syndrome in the US, at least for the majority of people. This syndrome was not John Down's. He did not have it himself. He does not own it. He did not truly discover what Down syndrome is. He just kind of put two and two together, but still didn't really know anything about it. And it had a racial basis behind it, which we now know today has nothing to do with race. Down syndrome has absolutely nothing to do with race. This is why I still get kind of ticked off when I hear people say Downs or Down's syndrome, because, it's not his. And quite frankly, I don't really think after learning all of that it should be called Down syndrome. Why is it named after John Langdon Down? I think, if I'm saying it right, it should be called Lejeune syndrome. That makes a lot more sense to me. And to mention, there's not many ways you can make fun of Lejeune syndrome, but there is a lot with Down syndrome. Like this past year, I have learned a lot about bullies in this community and towards people with Down syndrome, like calling my kids Downies, or people with Down syndrome are so down. And that's why in the Down syndrome community, we like to use the term up syndrome. I don't know. What do you think about that? I don't think it should be called Down syndrome. That's it. Happy 1 year to me learning about myself.